Lots to get through. We're not going to get them through all, but we're going to try your best and try to hit sort of the macro themes a lot of you are raising with us for Dr. Doom here. James writes in, on the 7th of April, Doctor, you were quoted as saying gold was dead money for 3 months. Since then, gold has rallied despite a stock market rally. What do you make of this, and where is gold going in the next 3 months?
Well, I mean, gold has rallied.
Confession time.
Yes, confession time. I mean, as I said, I don't think that gold will run up right away. But, I mean, I never sold my gold. I keep my gold. I'm still buying gold and so forth. I think in the long run it will be okay. But one has to be realistic. There are times when stocks do better than gold and times when gold does better than stocks. And since March 6th, stocks have performed much better than gold.
So, where's it going?
So, as I said, I think that in the long run, gold will go up. But one has to be realistic. As the risk profile of investors increases, in other words, they go into riskier assets and they play the momentum game. They buy equities now, and gold may not go up very much in the near future. That's my view.
If you look back in history, it hasn't really been a good hedge against inflation, has it?
It has been actually, let's say, an adequate hedge against inflation, but it all depends when you buy it. If you bought it in 1980 at the peak at $850, then today, you know, we're slightly higher, then it hasn't been a good hedge against inflation. But if you bought it at the lows, say, in 1999 at $251, then it's done very well. Okay.
Since we're talking about gold here, let me just bring in a related thing here. Mark writes in, he's an Australian. Number one, he wants to know, do you include Australia as an Asian market? Do you see value in it? You know, oil companies like Broken Hill, Rio, Woodside. And also, is the stockpiling of commodities by China? They have been stockpiling. You know how they're quite unabashed about trying to, you know, snare in long-term supplies, oil, copper, iron ore. What is that indicative of? Would you be positive on the commodity space?
Well, first of all, I have to define Asia. For me, Asia begins in Istanbul and extends essentially to Far East Russia, and in the north it starts Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and extends south to New Zealand. That's for me Asia. So it's a huge region, 3.6 billion people. And yeah, I include Australia into Asia, and I think that Australia will over time become more Asian-centric than US-centric, that its business ties will be much closer to linked into Asia than, say, to the Western world and to America.
Okay. Back to this question, back to the question about inflation. Right?
Yes.
You're talking about the worries about stimulus and the multiplier. In fact, they're not getting that much bang for the buck, right? Each dollar of federal money, of central bank money they throw in is not creating the kind of multiplier effect or the M2 creation like it used to. Lisa writes in here saying, hey, isn't there the possibility of deflation? See the Lisa one down there? It's near the top. Since most money supply is coming from central banks, and really we don't have a lot of consumption function that would normally lead to inflation. No demand pull or demand push. Is that the word? Cost push inflation.
Well, but I mean, there's a lot of misunderstanding about inflation and so forth. But one thing I guarantee you, if I send to each citizen of the US or any country a check of, say, $1 million, you stimulate consumption. You just create a huge deficit. But temporary, it stimulates consumption, it also stimulates investments, and it creates what I would call inflation. So if you're determined to create inflation, I tell you, nothing is easier than that. Nothing is easier than that.
Okay.
If you want to have it. And in America, they want to have it.
They want to have
inflation.
But a certain amount of inflation, 3% inflation is good. 30% inflation is disastrous.
But you see, it's a little bit, to be a little bit pregnant is good, and to be 100% pregnant if you're not married is not particularly good.
You can't be a little bit pregnant, though.
And so inflation is a dynamic process, and you can control the quantity of money you drop into this room, but what you don't control is where the volcanic eruptions of inflation occur. It could occur in commodities, can occur in wages, and it can occur in equities. But it's not a process where all prices move up at the same time to the same extent. That's the problem of inflation. Plus, it's easy to say, yeah, 3% is fine. But if 3% inflation is fine, please explain to me why 3% deflation isn't fine. You understand? You have to be I mean, consistent in your views as an economist. You cannot say that inflation is good and deflation is bad. I can show you many examples in the world of countries that went through deflation and they had a deflationary boom. In India, you can now buy a car for $2,500 US. So the price of the car in India has come down, and what does it do? It enlarges the number of people that can afford to buy a car. In other words, affordability improves. Is that bad? No, it's wonderful.
Well, it's bad for the world because now people who would never otherwise have a car are going to be burning fossil fuels and exacerbating climate change. But that's a different discussion, though. I mean, I understand, but we're still talking about things mutually exclusively, aren't we? Let me ask you this one here. Ethan, I'm frustrating him. It's okay.
Yes.
That's okay. Go on.
No.
All right, it's your turn.
Ask the next question.
Ethan, because we're talking about, Ethan writes in, what about peak oil? Won't a big decline in oil production keep the global economy from recovering? Thoughts about oil? It spiked up since last time we talked. We're at 60.
Yes. I mean, I think that peak oil is a reality. It doesn't mean that prices will necessarily go up in the immediate future, because peak oil means that the reserves are beginning to decline, which I believe is correct. And eventually the world will have less oil, but the world also becomes more oil efficient. Right. And there are other sources of energy like nuclear that could replace to some extent oil and natural gas. Perfect. And by the way, natural gas is the commodity that is now the most undervalued right now. You and T. Boone Pickens agree on that point. I know what you mean. There's a lot of it. Nobody's actually trying to get the stuff out. There's some conspiracy theory. And are you sick and tired of your neighbor invading your personal space when you